Right, so the hard-right coalition government of Benjamin Netanyahu might be about to collapse. Or at the very least, Netanyahu's majority in government will. Cobbled together with a dodgy deal with the far right as it was, might soon all be lost. And it's ironic that the far right, to whom Netanyahu consistently has to placate, and has done so in no small part by keeping this war in Gaza going, might end up actually being the ones responsible for its collapse, which would be a delicious case of irony, wouldn't it? A coalition of 6 separate parties, as it stands right now, was always going to be a delicate balancing act. It was 7, of course, at one point, one party having already splintered away and returning to the opposition benches. But where some conservative and liberal Israeli parties up until now have been prepared to put up and shut up within Netanyahu's coalition government in exchange for, of course, being in power, the actions of one far-right minister from one of these far-right parties might, however, have just pushed the limits for one of those quieter parties too far. And should they finally decide enough is enough as well now, this time around Netanyahu would lose his majority. And at that point, frankly, anything's possible. Right, so it's not often you're willing a government to collapse, per se, but when Benjamin Netanyahu is only able to hold his government together itself by continuing his war on Gaza, by scuppering every ceasefire attempt that is made, and when the hands of the world are consistently tied to act as well by the US veto at the UN Security Council, and whilst that nation, amongst several others, continue to heavily finance and support and arm Israel, collapse from within has seemed like the only way of bringing this war to an end, realistically, in the eyes of many outside observers. Politicians have failed the people of Gaza globally and repeatedly, failed to protect lives as a primary driving factor. What is in it for them being put first? Placing them on the side of the genocidalists for self-serving reasons, not upholding international law as they are signed up to, as they might have the brass neck to claim they are when they absolutely aren't, eh, Antony Blinken? But collapse the Israeli government may be about to do from within. Keeping far-right maniacs in line as part of government seems to have become more and more difficult as such people become more and more drunk on power, frankly. And one of the tipsiest definitely has to be Itamar Ben-Gvir, leader of Otzma Yehudit, the far-right anti-Arab Jewish supremacist party, a racist endeavour in and of itself, hands down in my view. Ben-Gvir himself having been convicted for inciting racism in the past, but he and his party were, despite all of this, nowhere near bad enough for Netanyahu to turn down as a potential partner to put himself in power again, more's the pity. In fact, Ben-Gvir became a lawyer, that is his profession, so he could more adequately represent himself for all the indictments he'd had levelled at himself over the years. Judges, presumably sick of seeing him brought up on charges, allegedly being the ones who suggested he tried studying law. Well, this latest debacle is one of those cases best summed up by the words "he's gone and done it this time," having a track record of causing dissent and civil unrest as he has both before and since entering government, stoking it even on other occasions, from joining with other settlers in the right-wing Nahala movement who love him to bits, who want rid of the Palestinians so they can colonise their lands, to celebrating plans for settlements in Gaza already being drawn up, praising the destruction of Palestinian property, even being caught on camera seemingly doing it himself too. But of all of his acts, the one that has arguably caused the most offence have been his trips up to Temple Mount, which is home to the compound of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, Temple Mount is a site of religious significance to all 3 main religions, which can trace their roots back to what is referred to collectively as the Holy Land: Christianity, Islam and Judaism. But as far as Temple Mount goes, the status quo is that Muslims can attend for prayer with few restrictions. However, non-Muslims can only enter the compound during certain times, through only one of the compound's 11 gates, and are not permitted to pray there. So what do you think Ben-Gvir did just 2 days ago on the Jewish holy day of fasting that is Tisha B'Av then? The festival of remembrance for the 2 ancient Jewish temples that once upon a time sat on Temple Mount that were destroyed. Well, he went up there with a load of other Jewish visitors, and in defiance of police instructions and the conventions in place, they went in and began praying and prostrating themselves everywhere, because of course they did. As you can imagine, there's been hell up over it. Condemnation has come from around the world. Even Antony Blinken and David Lammy have criticised him, so you can tell it must be really, really bad. Not bad enough for Keir Starmer to say anything, though, I've noticed. There was a delightful quote which really did nail the situation well, published in the Times of Israel, though, of all places, which read, "Jews going up to the Temple Mount is like throwing a match into an oil well," the Yated Naaman daily editorial said. The Temple Mount may turn into a volcano that covers the entire Middle East with ash. Well, all in all, it's a big no-no what Ben-Gvir and co went and did then, isn't it? But it goes beyond that, because the ramifications might have hit the Israeli government of which Ben-Gvir is a part. Like an earthquake, as it happens. The foundations are now looking decidedly crumbly as a result. In swipes from opposition parties, because naturally opposition parties will, and in keeping with that volcanic and match-striking attitude, Ben-Gvir has also been described as a pyromaniac for his actions. But it isn't the opposition in the Knesset, of course, that can bring the government down from within, which is where the problems Ben-Gvir has caused actually lie. Following much condemnation of Ben-Gvir's inflammatory actions, another coalition partner party is now questioning whether they can remain associated with a government that includes Otzma Yehudit. And again, the Times of Israel explains all of this in this excerpt here. Moshe Gafni, head of the Degel HaTorah faction of the United Torah Judaism Party, says Ben-Gvir doesn't care about the harm to the Temple Mount sanctity and the status quo, alleging he is causing immense damage to the Jewish nation and causing unnecessary hate on Tisha B'Av, the solemn day marking the destruction of the Jewish temples. Gafni says the faction will have to check with our rabbis whether we can be partners with him, and will clarify this to the Prime Minister as well. Now, where Benjamin Netanyahu survived the departure of the National Unity Party of Benny Gantz over his refusal to allow out an endgame for the war in Gaza, his majority reducing from 16 seats in the Knesset back down to 4, Gantz's party only having joined the government following the events of October 7th last year to strengthen the government's hand in light of that, and leaving when Netanyahu clearly was not planning on ending matters anytime soon, the fact that the United Torah Judaism Party, which is a religious conservative party of non-Zionist Jews, interestingly enough, although they still believe in occupying Palestine, so in that sense might as well be, but they have 7 members in the Knesset, so them leaving would leave Netanyahu 3 seats short of a majority, whilst trying to hold together a coalition of 5 parties by that point. So this could potentially be a big, possibly insurmountable problem for Benjamin Netanyahu. If it comes to pass, it's very difficult, to be honest, to see how Netanyahu might hold things together. The alternative to placate United Torah Judaism potentially would be to throw Otzma Yehudit out of the coalition, get rid of Ben-Gvir. The trouble is they have 6 seats. In fact, having stood on a joint ticket with the Noam Party and the religious Zionist party of Bezalel Smotrich in the last election, this coalition going into those last elections between them won 14 seats. And those other partners might be rather unhappy to see Otzma Yehudit booted out. So this wouldn't solve anything for Netanyahu either. It seems pretty hard to see how Netanyahu's government would survive matters here. Would they go forward as a minority coalition? Frankly, Netanyahu is probably desperate enough to try, even though what would be left would be even more right-wing and very much even more overtly Zionist. Anything to avoid those corruption charges, though, eh? But would religious Torah Judaism really pull the plug on everything potentially at this moment in time? Does it depend on their rabbis? Is their input absolute? Or does it depend on the likes of their leader Moshe Gafni and how he chooses to interpret that? Well, Gafni has threatened to pull out of the coalition a number of times before, and he hasn't. So perhaps his bluff might be called again here. Still, it looks like things might be worth keeping an eye on, doesn't it? And if nothing else, it shows that the cracks that are growing within Netanyahu's coalition are continuing to widen. Even if it doesn't collapse this time, can it really carry on in this vein, in this manner, with Ben-Gvir carrying on as he will, until 2026 when the next elections are due? Beginning to look less and less likely, isn't it? Meanwhile, in line with trying to keep himself in power at any cost and keep his coalition together, Netanyahu has once again scuppered peace talks before they've even got underway. This time has leaked details of him moving the goalposts once more and insisting on new and completely unreasonable demands, exposed it is him and not Hamas, as is too often reported, blocking the way to peace. Find out all about that in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.